Have you ever wondered how millions of Germans allowed Adolf Hitler and his Nazis to attack so many countries and commit genocide on millions of Jews while also brutally murdering millions of Russians and other civilians during World War II? The best answer, quite simply, is because they were all Goebbelized. Nazi Minister of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels, controlled all the media, and they justified these invasions and mass murders in the most insane and despicable ways. They brainwashed millions. It is quite laughable, actually, when our current president is often compared to Hitler and is called a dictator, when any educated person knows to achieve such a position of authority, one must control the media. Truth is, the other party, the Democrats, have controlled the media for decades, and their endless lies and propaganda has only gotten worse since Trump first ran for president. They have controlled other things too, like the power of the purse and the bureaucracy, the federal judicial system, and of course, higher education, just to name a few. But for this video, I focus entirely on the mainstream media. And yes, we are still being Goebbelized. A big accusation, I know. So how do I prove this? Well, it can easily be demonstrated, and much of this, the average American have no clue about. First, stating the obvious, and that is over 90% of all media is located in just 4 areas of the United States, specifically the state of California, New York City, Atlanta, and of course our capital, Washington, D.C. These are without a doubt the most liberal places in the country. ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, PBS, NPR, all located in these areas, the last 2 actual being funded by our government. 6 of the 8 largest publications in the U.S. are the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, Washington Post, USA Today, LA Times, and Newsday, all located in these same 4 areas of the country. Google, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram, you guessed it, same areas. Almost all of the major magazine publications like Newsweek, Forbes, Politico, Variety, Rolling Stone, the list goes on and on. Yep, you guessed it. All printed in the same places. All of them spreading the same propaganda and lies. Every single one of them. Most were and are still controlling speech, and not only dictating what story gets talked about, but spreading the same propaganda and lies. There are a few exceptions. Fox News, of course, the New York Post, and X, formerly known as Twitter, which Elon Musk has moved to Texas. 2. There are a few other conservative outlets, and streaming has allowed them and independent podcasters to compete on the airwaves. But when you consider that the legacy media, ABC, NBC, and CBS, centralizes its messaging to most large cities in the country, where they are literally repeating the same exact talking points over and over again. And while you also consider Google and many other search engines on the internet controlling and manipulating searches to the world that also greatly favor these liberal entities, well, quite frankly, the Joe Rogans of the world are barely scratching the surface. When you look at the last 3 presidential elections with candidates in Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris on the Democratic side, and of course Trump, aka Hitler, for the Republicans, do you really have to ask yourself why study after study, many of which come from liberal publications and think tanks, always had Democratic candidates being talked about favorably over 80–90% of the time, while Trump got well over 90% of negative coverage? Is that representing the American people? What if I were to tell you that in the last 3 elections, where Trump won twice, and one could easily argue all 3 times, that when you take out those 4 areas that I just mentioned, controlling the press and brainwashing the masses, Trump received over 52% of the vote. He got that even with the legacy media being affiliated within most large cities across America. But even if that wasn't the case, but look for yourself because it clearly is, Trump did in fact get close to 215 million votes over the last 3 elections, and over 48% of the popular vote, including actually winning the popular vote this election against Harris. Shouldn't the coverage be positive for him at least half the time if we have a fair press instead of less than 10%? I was hopeful that there was a chance the legacy media would change after he finally won the popular vote this time around. But no, they are simply tripling down and even being worse. President Trump is absolutely right when it comes to them all being fake news. And when you also consider brainwashed Hollywood and the endless late-night shows and some daytime vomit spewing, basically the same liberal mouthpieces in the exact same places spewing the exact same brainwashed talking points. It is simply mind-boggling. And how do you know they are brainwashed? You can have a conversation with just about any of these weirdos. On the seldom cases they actually go on an independent or conservative format and debate, and easily prove with facts that they still believe the lies they were fed to over and over again, each and every time. And they just return to the trough for more and more. Some do wind up thinking for themselves, though, which is why so many prominent figures either leave the party or ended up supporting Trump, like Musk, RFK, and Gabbard, and the top podcaster out there in Joe Rogan. But in case you are still in doubt, here is a short summary of where the legacy media misinformed, tricked, or flat out lied to you. Basically, since Trump first came down those escalators some decade ago, Russia, Russia, Russia. Endless lies about Russian collusion when it came to the 2016 election. Most people still don't know that the infamous Steele dossier was funded by the DNC and Hillary Clinton. She was actually fined by the FEC. Most people also don't know that the 34 felony counts that they charged Trump with is also a big farce, and that same FEC that fined Clinton actually passed on even fining Trump on the very thing that he was prosecuted on. More about the two-tier justice system and these outlandish cases against Trump in a future video. But this endless coverage about Trump and Russia eventually led to 2 impeachments, totally hampered his ability to lead in his first term. Not only was this election interference in the 2016 election, but one could easily argue it was treason while he was president. Many Trump supporters wonder why someone hasn't been held accountable yet. And the truth is because it is nearly impossible to hold Democrats responsible in the most corrupt and liberal city in America. How liberal is Washington, D.C.? Put it this way. The 23rd Amendment passed in 1961 gave our capital an electoral vote, and they have participated in 16 presidential elections and voted for the Democratic candidate in every single one of them. Not just barely either. The Democratic candidates have gotten no less than 74% of the vote, and they are only getting more liberal as no Republican candidate has gotten even 10% of the vote in the last 9 elections. But there were many other lies about Trump, including the good people on both sides lie. The lie that Trump Tower wasn't wiretapped, it was. The false claim about a swastika being on a Trump campaign sign was yet another lie. Removing the Martin Luther King bust, yep, you guessed it, another lie. Putin telling Megyn Kelly he had compromising information on Trump when he actually said the complete opposite. The fish food dumping in a Trump trip to Japan was another complete and utter lie. Trump campaign in contact with WikiLeaks before their election dump was yet another lie. It wasn't until after the dump was made. Trump lawyer Michael Cohen visiting Prague or Carter Page being a Russian spy, both also lies. The list goes on, and most of these had corrections, but they were often little snips in newspapers that millions wouldn't see, or a brief on-air apology that lasted less than 30 seconds, which is why so many people believe all of these lies to be true to this day. It isn't like Trump doesn't also lie. He has repeatedly, and almost all of it can be attributed to his ego, where he exaggerates to a certain point, might get suckered into believing something that hasn't been verified and it ends up being false, or sometimes he is simply being misinformed. The difference, of course, is the legacy media is there to debunk it almost immediately, and sometimes they lie again and leave out the parts of the Trump assertion that is actually true. Race. One of the most dangerous ways the legacy media is lying involves race, and it is without a doubt the most disgusting and troubling for this country. They went with the Jesse Smollett fake story about him being attacked by a Trump supporter, all of which was fabricated. The heinous lies told about Kyle Rittenhouse, the fabricated and outlandish claims about the hate crime, and the noose found in NASCAR driver Bubba Wallace's garage. And yes, even the media fueled misinformation when it comes to unarmed African Americans being shot by police. Misinformation and not full details of most of these incidents, many of them corrected days later, escalated the civil unrest in the country. All of these lies led to the justification of Black Lives Matter and the preceding riots that caused over $2 billion worth of destruction and endless looting, as well as the harming of over 700 police officers, and worse, the death of approximately a dozen people. Immigration. Where to start on this one? The most ingenious tactic of misinformation began about a decade or so ago, where the legacy media purposely stopped using the word illegal when it comes to immigrants who cross over the border illegally. This was so they could put them in the same boat as regular immigrants, which is basically all of us. And so they could start patting themselves on the back as though they care about these people. Truth is, they really don't. You never hear about the tens of thousands who have died trying to cross, those that are trafficked either as drug carriers or even worse as sex workers. And of course, you never hear about the endless children who are lost in the system, also many of which are trafficked for slave labor or sex. Some 300,000 have been misplaced during the Biden administration. President Obama often used the word illegal and was adamant about a secure border. It is why he was literally known for deportations. Obama deported over 3 million immigrants, and most of them never received any extra due process, and the court injunctions were minimal while he was doing it. He did all of this when crossings were still on the decline since the President Clinton and Bush years. It all changed under President Biden, where a record number of illegal crossings happened, and that administration purposely allowed and encouraged asylum seekers by implementing the CBP-1 application. Obviously, that app was abused, and many never showed up to legal entry or their respective court appearances, and an estimated 15 million illegals have entered the country. The legacy media seems perfectly fine with this, completely oblivious to recent polling where American citizens, in a comfortable majority, want all illegals deported. That complete disdain for actual American citizens is obvious as they hardly ever talk about the cases of crimes committed by some gangs or hardened illegals that have crossed the border. Like the murders of Laken Riley, Rachel Morin, 12-year-old Jocelyn Nungarai, or most recently, Larisha Cheryl Thompson. Thompson, a 40-year-old black woman, has barely received any attention at all from the mainstream media. Most shockingly, however, is how they never talk about the influx of fentanyl that has gotten in because of the lax border during the Biden administration, knowing full well that the epidemic has caused endless deaths over the last decade. Over 250,000 Americans have died from fentanyl overdose since 2018 alone, much of which comes from our southern border. No credit is given to Trump for securing the border, almost immediately upon taking office using executive orders, something Biden could have done, and crossing are at all-time lows. Instead, the legacy media has focused on the crackdown negatively, again ignoring polls who are in favor of it, defending illegal immigrants like Kilmar Abrego Garcia, aka the Maryland Man, a suspected human trafficker and a verified MS-13 member who is also known for beating his wife. They defend liberal activist judges using injunctions to derail Trump's deportation agenda, using words like due process, knowing full well that few, if any, injunctions were ever used when Obama deported upwards of 5 million people, when you include those apprehended at the border, and few, if any, ever received extra due process.